Crixalis the Sand King has emerged from the scintillant wastes to grind his enemies to dust. Blessed with a powerful initiation toolkit, this sabulous scorpion can reliably crumble even the most durable opposition. Were you expecting Sandy Claws? Oh no, it's just the history of
Sand King.
Sand King is a melee strength hero who's highly versatile, but he excels primarily in initiating fights, as well as dealing huge AoE magic damage. His first spell is Burrow Strike. This causes him to quickly burrow in the ground and emerge at a targeted point, dealing magic damage and stunning any enemy units caught along the way. This is a simple spell that allows Crixalis to lock an enemy down and to reposition himself to use the rest of his abilities. As with most mobility spells, this can also be used to run away from the enemy team, and it can even stun them along the way to ensure a clean escape. Following this is Sandstorm. This creates a large area around Sand King, where enemy units will take a small amount of magic damage every second that they're in the AoE. While inside, Sand King can freely move around and will be invisible, so it's effective for early game harassing and last hitting, while the late game use of Sandstorm is to slowly chip away at the enemy in a team fight and to wait for your cooldowns as you'll be protected by the invisibility. The effect will end early if Sand King steps outside of the area, so be aware of it, otherwise you'll be a lot more vulnerable than you bargained for. Crixalis' third ability is Caustic Finale. This is a passive spell that gives Sand King's auto attacks the ability to inject venom into an enemy unit. The affected targets will have reduced movement speed for a few seconds, and if they die with the debuff on, they'll also explode, dealing a base amount of magic damage as well as a percentage of max health damage to nearby enemies. Caustic Finale seems like two spells shoved into one. The slowing portion has the most use when applied to enemy heroes, allowing Sand King to chase them down to secure the kill. The damage portion of the skill is mostly applied to creeps, giving Crixalis some much needed wave clear potential, as placing the debuff on 2 or 3 creeps is enough to wipe out the entire wave in a chain explosion. This can also be used in the laning phase to threaten the enemy heroes trying to last hit, since getting within range of the creeps affected by Caustic Finale can cause some massive damage, but it's a little hard to perform reliably. With that, the Sand King's ultimate is Epicenter. After a brief casting animation, several shockwaves will emit from under Crixalis, dealing magic damage and slowing enemies briefly. Each pulse will also be bigger than the last, ensuring that you scour all of your enemies with minimal effort. Epicenter is the definition of a big teamfight spell, and although the cast point makes it awkward to use, you can set yourself up for success with a Blink Dagger, Burrow Strike, or even Sandstorm to make sure that it goes off without a hitch. While this is a huge game changer in the early game, the power of the spell starts falling off the later the game goes, so be sure to make it count as soon as you can. By quickly examining his skills, it's clear that Sand King is a powerful instigator who can fulfill whatever his team needs due to his flexibility. And what should be clear to you right now is that you should subscribe to my channel. Just click the button, it won't hurt you. Right, Sand King?
Yes, indeed.
That's what I thought. So please subscribe if you haven't. You would make this tall guy very, very happy. Now back to the show. The multi-legged monarch made his way into Dota All-Stars on October 21st, 2004 in patch 5.76. Here, he's a Scourge hero, and he uses the green Arachnithid model. The initial description calls him a powerful combat hero that is at home with the Earth. He wouldn't receive an update to his lore until version 6.17, which the patch notes credit Lord Insidious as the author. Crixalis was a normal scorpion in Kalimdor's deserts. For unknown reasons, he evolved much faster than his brothers, growing extremely large. Because he was susceptible to the Lich King's mind control, he was summoned and is now guarding the Frozen Throne. While much larger, Crixalis still possesses his scorpion abilities, such as the power to burrow into the ground and resurface elsewhere, impaling all in his wake. His tail contains a violent venom which causes his enemies to explode. Scouts have discovered that he can create large tremors in the ground, killing anyone distracted enough to get near him. His story had an additional revision in version 6.53, written by You Suck at Dota, which expands on the original tale. A guardian of the ancient Nerubian kingdom of Azjol-Nerub, Crixalis fled to the deserts of Kalimdor in an attempt to escape the genocide of the Lich King. The harsh climate transformed this warrior into a master of the earth, able to tear the skin off his foes with vicious sandstorms. Those unfortunate to succumb to his potent toxins are condemned to violently burst apart in a cloud of noxious fumes. Sensing his growing power, the Lich King sought out Crixalis and, unable to sway him, slew him in battle. Summoned to aid the undead Scourge, the heart of the Sentinel quivers each time the ground trembles beneath them. In the first few patches, Sand King used the voice of a Nubarak, which would later be used by Nerubian Assassin. This was updated, however, to the Crypt Fiend quotes, and this new set of voice lines depicts Crixalis as an intimidating, almost otherworldly presence.
Make your choice. What's done is done. You may feel a sting. Fall before the scourge.
In the first edition run, Sand King was equipped with Burrow Strike and Epicenter, and these would stick with him without much alteration for the duration of his Dota career. But since you know all about these two already, let's have a chat about his long-forgotten original skills, Dust Trail and Entrench. Dust Trail was a passive ability that would leave a trail of sand behind Crixalis, slowing and causing enemies to miss up to 28% of their attacks. Although the numbers were terribly weak in the early levels, I like this ability a lot for its synergy with Burrow Strike. This would allow you to initiate with your stun and walk ahead of your target, body blocking them along the way to really make their lives miserable. Not only that, but this does fit in well with the hero thematically, and the ever-present trail makes it easy to remember why he's called the Sand King. Sometime around patch 5.82, Dust Trail came with an ominous warning that read, "Do not, under any circumstances, learn this skill if you are Sentinel." This was because the spell was programmed to only affect Sentinel units for some reason, similar to how Venomancer couldn't regenerate HP if he were picked on the Sentinel side. And you can, totally watch the history of Venomancer to learn more about that. Entrench was an active spell that lets Crixalis dig into the ground. You can then activate the ability again to pop out from underneath, dealing damage and stunning surrounding enemy units, with a fairly decent 400 AoE at max level. I made the mistake of assuming the combo would be Burrow Strike into Entrench, but it turns out that after you dig into the ground, there's a 10-second cooldown before you can untrench yourself. Because of this little technicality, this spell is better used as an ambush. You dig yourself wherever you think someone will walk by, like at a jungle camp or directly on top of a rune spawn, then catch him by surprise and follow up with Burrow Strike and Epicenter. In a more defensive scenario, you can always delve into the ground while being chased and pray that they don't have any detection. As a whole, Sand King's original kit was a solid mix of function and flavor. I think it was a unique concept at the time, and his skills all contributed to make Crixalis stand out. Sand King's first major change occurred in 6.00, where Dust Trail was replaced with the first version of Sandstorm. This was a passive spell that granted Sand King bonus damage per level, as well as allowing him to place a debuff on his target that caused them to miss a percentage of their attacks, up to 35% at max level. Don't have much to say about it. I think it's a downgrade in the grand scheme of things. This spell took away a big part of Sand King's visual identity, and replaced it with something generic that any other strength hero could have. This patch also disabled SK from buying Desolator, most likely due to the fact that Sandstorm here is a unique attack modifier, and it wouldn't stack or probably cause some sort of coding error. This passive was pretty short-lived, as 6.05 would replace it with Caustic Finale. This was a much simpler version of the spell we know today, as it would only place a debuff that would deal AoE damage if the affected unit would die. The debuff did last for 8 seconds though, so you could at least harass with it in the early game, and it would help with wave clears down the line. Not having any additional effects, however, did make it kinda boring. 6.09 stirred the pot once again when Entrench was usurped by a new and improved Sandstorm. This would conjure up a sandstorm that affects a large AoE, dealing magic damage to enemy units inside the radius, while turning Sand King invisible. What makes it noticeably different from its current form is the fact that this is a channeling spell, so if Sand King moves, gets stunned, or gets interrupted in any way, the sandstorm will end. The numbers here were pretty garbage. I mean, 20 damage per second at max level isn't going to be doing much. The damage would be buffed in 6.12, and its AoE would get a nice boost in 6.50. But for the time being, the most use you would get out of the spell would be to dodge enemies with the invisibility. In 6.60, Sand King received his first Aghanim Scepter upgrade. It's not all that interesting. It just increases the number of Epicenter pulses and reduces the cooldown at each level. But even if it isn't all that fascinating, I'm glad he was able to get something. After all, what kind of king would he be without a scepter? And that about wraps up Sand King's time in Dota All-Stars. Although brief, it would lay the groundwork for his skills in the future, and it left all of his enemies quaking in fear. Sand King received a blazing hot port in Heroes of Newerth in the form of Magmus, who debuted on August 10th, 2009 in version 0.1.34. Magmus is an anthropomorphic incarnation of magma, although I guess since he's above ground now, he's technically lava. He wields a hammer to attack and has the physique of a defensive lineman, giving off an appearance similar to a blacksmith. His lore explains that the primordial and elemental creature known as Magmus is no demon, though he fights alongside the Hellborn. Rather, he was drawn forth from the earth, as evil calls to evil, and separate flames join to form an inferno. A holdover from an ancient cataclysmic age of fire, Magmus dreams of returning New Earth to ash, lava, and cinder, and he wields his considerable might and magic in that terrible cause. Magmus's voice is the level of New Earth corniness that we've all come to love and tolerate. His speech pattern is reminiscent of a treant, slow, plodding, and it wouldn't seem out of place in Lord of the Rings. His quotes constantly reference heat or burning up to some capacity, and it also does the very typical New Earth thing where they add an obnoxious amount of filters to the point where some of his lines are impossible to comprehend.
Don't sweat it. Let's burn. I will melt you down to nothing. Burdenating of a countryside.
Magmus's skills are a direct port of Sand King's, with his abilities named Lava Surge, Steam Bath, Volcanic Touch, and Eruption, with the Staff of the Master's upgrade changing his ultimate to Pyroclasm. There's unfortunately not a lot more to say about Magmus, as his skills have pretty much stayed the same since the beginning. In fact, there haven't been any functional changes for over 12 years at this point. It's a real shame, seeing as how New Earth has taken hero concepts and changed them up, like how they did with Kronos and Magebane, but I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're feeling the nostalgia bug, you can get your fix with the Scorpion Magmus alternate avatar. This changes the hero into a legally distinct version of Crixalis, and he even retains his fiery aesthetic to boot. There is also a free avatar in Swagmus, who's just Magmus except he's got sunglasses on, which may or may not appeal to you based on how much you enjoy clever wordplay. For another direct port from a much lower budget, less good game, here is Tartarus from Heroes Evolved. He's a big frost turtle who's more or less a port of Sand King, with his version of Burrow Strike named Charge, Sandstorm named Silent Storm, and Epicenter named Spirit Beast. Instead of Caustic Finale, he has an active named Poison Spit, which deals magic damage to a unit over 5 seconds. If the target dies, the poison will infect another enemy within range. Not a bad alternative to Sand King's current skill. As a matter of fact, I think this spell is actually better than Caustic Finale. It's just difficult for me to praise this game because it's so janky, and it clearly steals ideas from both Dota and League. I mean, the description for Silent Storm outright says that he summons a sandstorm. Like, they don't even try to hide it. They could have called this skill something like Tundra, and it would have worked just fine. But I digress. In the honorable mentions, Heroes of the Storm has d.va. She's a tanky frontline hero with defensive capabilities, and one of her combos mirrors the Sand King bread and butter pretty closely. She can use her first spell, Boosters, to position herself near the enemy, which can be followed up with one of her heroic abilities, Bunny Hop. This has her jumping around, dealing damage in a radius, and stunning enemies if they're hit 4 times by the hops. It should be noted that the skill originally slowed with every jump, so it was the closest thing the game had to Epicenter. There's also Thrall, who's more of a frontline fighter. But one of his heroic abilities, Earthquake, causes damage in a large AoE around him that deals magic damage and slows enemy units. The Earthquake doesn't follow him, and it's meant to control the area rather than outright damage your intended targets. In League of Legends territory, Rammus is the closest thing to Sand King, even following the desert motif. His Q, Powerball, is a long-distance mobility spell that gets him where he needs to be. His ultimate, Soaring Slam, has him leap to an area, leaving behind a series of aftershocks that deal magic damage and slowing any enemies caught. To ensure that you deal the damage here, you can also lock down a single target with Frenzying Taunt, which forces that unit to attack you for a few seconds, effectively acting as a short disable. Rammus is probably the closest thing you'll get to the Sand King gameplay, but if all you care about is visual aesthetics, then Skarner will be your go-to. Skarner doesn't share much with Sand King, other than being a scorpion who initiates fights. In fact, his ultimate is more like Bat Riders than anything, but I will say that every time I show someone who doesn't play Dota 2 a picture of Sand King, they usually go, "Haha, what's Skarner doing in Dota?" So there you go, because as we all know, Riot Games invented scorpions. To really emulate the Crixalis vibe, you'll want to get the Guardian of the Sand Skarner skin, that not only has the Shuriman theme, he's even got a similar set of teeth to Sand King. Separated at birth, I tell ya. Sand King was introduced in Dota 2 as part of the original hero pool from TI1, dating way back to August 2011. He follows in the footsteps of the original Warcraft 3 Sand King, as his design is based off of a typical scorpion. He has a primarily brown color scheme to reflect his arid origins, as well as a huge underbite with a row of sharp teeth, alongside 4 green eyes, just to give him a little splash of personality. By examining his old beta portrait and skill icons, it looks like the hero was originally intended to have a primarily black color scheme with yellow eyes, looking a little more alien as a result. It's also a well-known bit of trivia that Sand King is Gabe Newell's favorite hero, confirmed in a Reddit AMA back in 2014. Things could have easily changed over the course of 7 years, but since he hasn't commented otherwise, this is the absolute truth that we all have to live with. His lore provides a fairly straightforward origin story that explains Sand King's birth and role in the world of Dota, but doesn't do much to explain his involvement in the War of the Ancients. The sands of the scintillant waste are alive and sentient. The whole vast desert speaks to itself, thinking thoughts only such vastness can conceive. But when it needs to find a form to communicate with those of more limited scope, it frees a fragment of itself and fills a carapace of magic armor formed by the cunning Djinn of Kaldin. This essential identity calls itself Crixalis, meaning Soul of the Sand, but others know it as Sand King. Sand King takes the form of a huge arachnid, inspired by the scintillant wast's small but ubiquitous denizens, and this is a true outward expression of his ferocious nature. Guardian, warrior, ambassador, Sand King is all of these things, inseparable from the endless desert that gave him life. Crixalis' voice lines are truly a masterpiece of audio design, and he's voiced by David Scully, who also does the lines for other heroes like Dazzle and Juggernaut. Sand King speaks in a deep baritone in a controlled, slower pace, giving off the feeling of power and intelligence. Although he doesn't have many lore-significant lines, the way that he speaks makes him stand out and gives the hero a distinct identity.
Sand King cometh. I'll send you down to nothing.
It comes naturally to me.
I knew I could wear you down.
A few of Sand King's cosmetic sets provide more insight into the culture of the scintillant wastes, or you could just turn him into a crawfish and call it a day. The ceremonial carapace of Kaldin set all describe a religious commemoration which honors the Djinn of Kaldin. The body and head equipment merely say that they are adornments worn for the most sacred occasions, while the arm slot specifically states that they are worn to summon the full attention of the Djinn. For more details about the ceremony itself, the leg item says that all the rites of Kaldin are done as dance, with each step prescribed and enacted in precise detail. A misstep can mean an age of misfortune, but Sand King has never put one crawler wrong. The stinger item says that at the height of the ceremony, 7 virtuous acolytes are stung to death in one swipe, which, while radical, seems like a bum deal for the acolytes. While we're on the subject, there was an item called the Carapace of Kaldin in the Siltbreaker event. It seems like the item was partially inspired by Sand King's homeland, but the effects don't really match up with Crixalis' lore. It just doubles your health and mana regen, while returning 33% of incoming damage back to the attacker. Pretty cool, but not related to anything. The Ancient Sovereign set continues the motif of uncovering the olden days by representing the items as artifacts, and describing what life was like way back when. The Sandworn Visage is the most significant of the bunch, as it was uncovered in an ancient ruin, and reveals what the Ancient Sovereign looked like. The Claw and the Stinger both explain that the Ancient Sovereign was a particularly violent being. He had perfected the most painful death with a stinger, and death by its claws was greatly desired. So much so, in fact, that the crawlers bring up that Sand King paid tribute to the Sovereign with every step. The wings also bring up that the Ancients of the Desert used to fly before those appendages became vestigial. Imagine that. A desert of flying scorpions. Sand King also has 2 immortal items, which are bound together by a character known as the Spire Mage. The Baron Crown and the Baron Vector don't provide too much additional info, as they seem to be a pair of generic magical items, but the crown does transform the wearer for all time into the ruler of Desert Wanderers and sovereign of the Barren Lands, which is kinda neat. The Baron Vector has a ridiculous line that says how it transmits a corpuscular invasion, which are not words that normal human beings speak. In the expanded Dota universe, Sand King was a planned hero for Artifact Foundry. In the game, he's a green hero with pretty average stats, but his real value comes from his utility. His ability is Burrow Strike, which allows him to move up to 5 spaces away, dealing 1 damage and stunning any adjacent enemies. His signature card is Sandstorm, which affects an entire lane's worth of enemies. It gives his enemies Decay, which means they take additional damage in combat, and it randomizes their combat targets, prioritizing units over your tower. And just so I can point it out, the beta artwork for both Sand King and Sandstorm were much goofier and more in line with the MS Paint monstrosities that Valve is known for. Just like in Dota 2, Sand King and Artifact focuses on disrupting his enemies while the rest of his team follows up. There isn't much more information available since it looks like Sand King was in the beginning stages of development, to the point where he lacks any kind of lore and voice lines. From what we have seen, it looks like Crixalis would have found a great spot in the world of Artifact, and we can only imagine what we've all missed out on. Dota Underlords adopted the Tremoring Tyrant as a tier 5 hero in the Savage and Insect alliances. He brings Burrow Strike and Caustic Finale to his arsenal, where they mimic their Dota 2 counterparts to a T, and his upgrade path is based off of the Ruler of the Frostbite Dune set. The biggest detail to note from Sand King here is in the voice lines. The voice actor was changed from David Scully to Jack Daniel, whose interpretation of the character is more cunning and less imposing. He still does a good job of portraying Crixalis as a member of high nobility, but it's a much sneakier reading, and he's a lot more arrogant here.
The Sand King graces you with his presence. No one denies the Sand King. I came a long way to win your war. You are worthy to stand alongside me.
As far as character relationships go, Sand King has goodwill among the insect allies, where he offers to mentor Nyx Assassin and shares a mutual respect with Broodmother.
Come, Nyx, let me take you under my wing. Good work, Nyx. You would make a fitting queen, Arachnia. A pity we could not be on the same side, Broodmother. Jealousy is unbecoming of you, Broodmother.
Sand King, impressive work, as always. I have my eyes on you, Crixalis.
Back in the world of Dota 2, the changes that Sand King experienced have mostly affected the minor things that don't affect his overall gameplay. Case in point, 6.84 made Caustic Finale trigger both on death and the buff expiring. If it expires, the spell will only deal 30% of the damage. Multiple attacks on the same target also no longer refresh the debuff, and it now slows damaged units by 20% for 3 seconds. I felt like this was a much needed change for Caustic Finale. Giving it some extra utility made it more than just a wave clearing passive. In 6.86, Sand King's Aghanim Scepter upgrade was reworked. Instead of improving Epicenter, this would double Burrow Strike's cast range at each level, and make it apply the current level of Caustic Finale to every hero hit. This was definitely the right move to make here. This change to Scepter made it much more prominent, and being able to use it so frequently gives you a lot of value. Compare this to the old Scepter upgrade, where all it does is increase your ultimate's damage, and it's not even a contest. In 6.87, Sandstorm's max channel time was adjusted to 50 seconds at each level. This was good for a couple of reasons, namely that 20 seconds of Sandstorm isn't that effective in the laning phase, and 80 seconds is way too much towards the end. By having it always go for 50 seconds, you get a lot more use out of it throughout the duration of the game. In 7.00, Sand King received his first set of talents, and I wish I had more to say about it, but they were all junk. A small but much needed adjustment came in the form of his Scepter upgrade, no longer applying Caustic Finale to illusions. This pretty much only mattered to Phantom Lancer, but it was nice to not have a massive nuclear explosion set off anytime you wanted to play the hero. 7.20 had a fun alteration to Sandstorm, as the ability no longer required channeling, which allowed Sand King to move freely inside of the AoE. He is revealed for a bit when he attacks or casts spells inside the area, but just being able to do anything makes the spell so much more appealing. The duration and cooldowns were adjusted to compensate, but it's a small price to pay for some engaging gameplay. Back to Caustic Finale for a minute. In 7.25, it actually slowed the target's attack speed in addition to everything else, which I thought was very cool, and could have made the spell more viable in the laning phase, but none of this matters because 7.27b gave the spell a slight rework. It now no longer explodes upon expiration, so the unit does need to die in order to deal AoE damage, and it no longer slows attack speed. However, it does deal max health as damage now, so it's a decent trade-off. The last major change so far occurred in 7.28, when Sand King got an Aghanim Shard upgrade. This would add a passive component to Epicenter, where a single pulse would come out for every 700 distance that Sand King has moved. This mostly has applications when combined with Burrow Strike, as it can put out a little bit more damage, but for the price of a shard, it's probably not worth your time. And with that, we're all caught up with the Sand-Soaked Scorpion. Now that you know all about his humble origins, his various influences, and the changes that made him who he is today, you're on your way to start your very own sting operation. So hey, thanks for watching all of that. I know this episode's been in production for a while, but life's been pretty busy. For example, here's a new cat that I have. Her name's Turnip. So in the interest of getting this out as soon as possible, I'll skip my favorite comments from the last video for now, but they will be coming back in the future, so don't worry there. Anywho, you know the deal by now. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch, and I guess I'll see you soon.